Okay, so we're going to look at the Board of Education of Hendrick Hudson Central School District, Westchester City versus Rowley. So we'll start with some background in the case. Amy Rowley was a student at Furnace Woods School in Hendrick Hudson School District. She was hearing impaired, and this was in elementary school. So she was younger at the time. She did really well in class. A lot of the research focused on how she did better in some areas than her non-handicapped peers. She was able to move from grade to grade, and at the time they used kind of this FM transmitter, which I also saw was similar to like a hearing aid in some of the articles that I found. And then in addition to that, she was able to read lips really well. Despite this, her parents at the IEP meeting wanted to request an ASL interpreter for her to support Amy in the classroom. So the school eventually turned them down. They decided that Amy did not have a need for this service. There was an interpreter that did spend some time with her in class, kind of doing some evaluating. It wasn't clear if she was serving as a support at that time or if she was more focused on the assessment piece. But after that time in class and then the district's consultation with their committee on the handicapped, excuse me, they came to that conclusion that she did not need that support in order to move forward with her IEP. So we'll look at kind of the court rulings first, and then once we have a kind of layout of the case, we'll go over some of those concepts. But the case is going to focus on what does a FAPE mean, what is the free and appropriate public education. So that's kind of what we're going to be focusing on the most, and then some of those core guiding documents for the legislature, like the IDEA and the EHA, education handy, or the, excuse me, the original document that for handicapped students. So at the administrative hearing, that's what Amy's parents requested after the school's denial. They were denied again due to the progress Amy was making in those areas I mentioned before, academically, socially, educationally. Kind of the same. They affirmed what was said before by in the original ruling, that she didn't need that support in order to continue making progress. She was doing it on her own. And then the parents decided to challenge that decision as well. And that was brought to the New York Commissioner of Education, where he also agreed with the administrative hearing and stated that she, again, does not need these supports. So then it went to the district and circuit court. Both of these courts ruled in favor of the Rowleys, so they overturned the administrative hearing and review decisions on the grounds that Amy wasn't reaching her full potential with the current supports and the IEP that was currently in place. So it got brought to the Supreme Court in a 6-3 ruling. The school district ruled in favor of Amy and her family on the grounds that, ruled in favor of the school district on the grounds that Amy was receiving an adequate education and personalized instruction. They reasoned that in order to receive a free and appropriate public education, students needed to be presented with the basic floor of opportunity and really only needed access to an education that provided some benefit. The some benefit is going to be a key word and key phrase that kind of is a theme throughout more rationale. So here's the FAPE that I was talking about and the core concepts that were addressed in this case. So one of the essential questions are, what does it exactly mean to have free and appropriate public education? What is required for a school to provide this? The ruling basically demonstrated the court's interpretation of this meaning and laid out in the education for all handicapped children what that original intention was. So the Rowley standard was then set, and this standard was basically a two-part test that helped courts decide if schools were in compliance with providing a FAPE or not. And these two components were schools following procedural safeguards as laid out in the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, and then the student's IEP is enough to demonstrate benefit from the plan. So procedural safeguards are kind of those basic expectations and rules laid out, that there are steps that need to be followed. Are they followed? Were they seen to appropriately? And then if that IEP can demonstrate some benefit from the plan. And what does this standard mean? It determined the meaning of a FAPE, so we were able to answer that question by the court's ruling. Students really only need to have an IEP that gives some benefit, and I keep saying some benefit because that is the primary component and piece of this ruling. So this means that there's no guarantee to what level students with an IEP will receive from their education, what will receive benefit from their education. If they can receive more than some, that is great according to this ruling, but it is not guaranteed that they would exceed that. This precedent-setting case also established that the schools were able to determine the supports and services that a student ultimately needs and leaves that power with the school, not the families. So what does this mean? This case was the first ruling on the act, later known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, that the Supreme Court had made. So again, it set that precedent for courts or cases to follow, and really was able to help schools determine and help courts determine what was expected of schools and what was expected out of that IEP for these students. So schools now had that standard to follow, and at the time, the conversation was kind of left open for students who were struggling in the general education setting and needed potential alternative settings, like a different classroom, to obtain some benefit from the education. So looking at a silver lining, if I'm considering the impact on the schools today, I can find myself saying this case positively impacts education only because it opened that conversation for the interpretation of a free and appropriate public education. And if it wouldn't have happened when it did, there's a potential that this conversation could have been postponed, maybe never happened. We don't know. It opened the door for those fighting for their students who deserve to have a meaningful education. So I personally don't agree with the ruling of this case, but I do think it was a positive impact because of the doors that it opened. And this was seen in the Andrew case that later became a monumental decision for our students, where this ruling eventually was overturned and students were allowed and received the rights and privileges to have an education that provided more than the minimum, and allowed them to have a meaningful, beneficial education.